Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Brian Cardin, currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Fuse. And before that, Lattice Engines, Eloqua, and Forrester. He's kind of like the Babe Ruth of marketing, although he stayed in Boston. So, we got the Babe, but he stayed there. Let me give you a long list here. Top 10 global CMO for companies over 250 million. Top 15 CMO on Twitter by Social Media Marketing Magazine. Top 50 most influential people in sales lead management. Now his head's getting a little bigger. It's a good thing we don't have video going. Now, Brian and I chatted first back in 2011. We were just reminiscing about that when he was at Eloqua. And I had the audacity at that time to interview John Miller of Marketo First, which I seem was like that was a little bee in your bonnet there at that moment. But anyway, funny enough, I quoted Brian in a Fast Company post I did in 2012 called 5 Ways to Know Your Marketing Metrics Don't Suck. And I suspect it was a funny post. Anyway, I suspect we'll be spending a lot of time in our conversation about metrics today. So Brian, welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Well, your intro covers so much ground. It's unbelievable. So you are so into this. I'll tell you.
All right. So you're at a company called Fuse. I noticed on the website that you use the term fuser, perhaps as in relationship to your customer. I thought that was kind of cool. Can you describe Fuse in 6 words or less?
Yeah, cloud-based communications.
Okay, cloud-based communications. Good.
So it's voice, chat, and video in the cloud. So what's really happened over the last 10 years is all these great consumer communication tools, FaceTime and Skype or Slack, and then business communications is not kept up. We still have dusty old Avaya and Cisco phones, and the WebEx doesn't work that well. Right now we're using a very new modern tool called Zoom that really works. So there's a whole next generation of cloud-based communication tools for voice, messaging, and video conferencing, and we do that for large companies, for the enterprise. So large companies that want to modernize their communications, they rely on Fuse to do that.
So that's a really interesting thing. Let's talk about, on a broad basis, from a strategic standpoint, what do you think, what's the story that is sort of distinguishing what Fuse does relative to, say, your competition?
So we very much talk about the future of work is not like the old work. So it used to be people come to a physical office. And of course, we're seeing that very distributed workforces, more international things. If we look at who's won Nobel Prizes, it used to be individual people won Nobel Prizes. And over the last 15 years, almost every Nobel Prize in physics or economics has been won by groups of people, 2 people or 3 people collaborating around the world. So the way great work gets done today is not through one person working solely, but it's through collaboration. And so organizations have to have great tools. And so we talk about this movement of the future of work. And it could be like companies like WeWork are defining the future of work. There's a new environment. People working on a sofa, people working at Starbucks. It's just a new way of working, and we're part of that movement.
Got it. That's really interesting. It's just finishing Isaacson's biography of Einstein, and It's interesting. He was a guy who worked alone. And for better or for worse, I mean, he did bounce ideas off of people, but it's like all his really great accomplishments happened at a very young age in 1905, and then the next 50 years was him chasing this one dream of a unified theory. Anyway, but he did win a Nobel Prize, but not for relativity, and it was just interesting to me because I think that may have been ultimately the fact is he liked to work alone. But I think you're right. The future of work is collaboration. And I think in some ways, it probably limited what he was able to contribute to the world. So,
I have to ask you, though,
yes.
as a great writer, I love Walter Isaacson, but I almost can't get through it. The amount of detail and research. Like, are you a big fan of all of his biographies?
That's funny. I enjoyed the Franklin one, but I'm just a Franklin nut. So I've read probably 15 biographies of Franklin. And I have to say that his was, I was glad he wrote it because I felt like he writes for the masses pretty well, but it wasn't the most distinguished biography of Franklin by far. So, I find him easy to read. I power through some of the tech because I just frankly couldn't understand it no matter what he did.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's funny that you should say that. He's not on the, like he's not a Chernow.
Yeah.
No, and so that, and the Grant biography that was recently written, was that Chernow?
Yes.
That was phenomenal.
Wow. So did Isaacson cover new ground with this biography? If you've read so many other biographies,
I haven't read a biography of Einstein before, so it was new ground to me.
Got it.
So that's simple. And and again, he's such a profound guy. You think of smart and you just have his names. You wonder, how did this guy become a brand? And part of it was he looked the part. He had this crazy hair and his funny nose
and the sweater and everything. Yeah, he was almost like. It's almost crazy. It's like become an iconic image. And I believe his estate actually had to sue for the rights to his image and likeness because it's used in so many ads without permission. And so you're right. It's almost like an icon or like the Coca-Cola symbol or the swish. That's so interesting.
Yeah. No, anyway, so if you think about it from a marketing standpoint, I mean, he really was a superstar brand and a huge influencer. But anyway, we digress here. As interesting as this part of it is, let's just talk. So we're at the future work, which is a big, bold promise. But a lot of people could claim that they are participating in the future of work. How do you own your segment of it and make sure that that story ultimately comes back to you?
We're trying to align ourselves with companies that we think are about the future of work. They're best places to work. Employees love working there. It's so interesting. One of my colleagues was dropping his kid off at college and noticed that they were moving the desks outside the dorm rooms into the hallway. And I couldn't figure out why. And so I said, why are you moving the desk out? And they said, we don't need a desk because we can work on a bed, we can work on a sofa, we can work on a chair, and we have no paper. And so it's sort of, there's this whole generation of people who just think very differently. My kids, of course, never pick up the phone and call me.
Right.
They text me, It's like a whole separate, so I think we're going through this major change in how people like to collaborate and work together. And of course, there's this talent war going on right now. The economy is very strong. It's very hard to get top quality people. And I think most employers now believe that you want the best athlete regardless of where they live. So people are in different time zones now. People are not working physically together. And so they're asking the question, how do we drive productivity, better collaboration, higher levels of satisfaction when we have very much a distributed workforce, people in different time zones, with different cultures. So someone in California is collaborating with someone in China. Someone in Australia has to collaborate here. How do we do this best? And so great organizations are starting to figure this out. And where we fit in, we are the platform that allows people to communicate effectively, share, and work together across geography and time zones.
It's funny. So we have an employee who actually is a millennial nomad, and he's currently in Copenhagen, and he's worked for us for several years. We also have an employee in Toronto. We're a tiny company, but we make it work.
Yeah.
And I tell you, Zoom has really made a big difference for us. I have to say, it's really been amazing just to have the face-to-face. You think conference calls are fine. No, I think video is really essential today to quality communications, because otherwise people are doing their email while they're on their phone.
You are 100% right. There have been all these studies. We've done some of them about the value of video, seeing people's faces. They talk about 80% of communication happens non-verbally. And so you can see their expression. Are they taking it in? And as your point, are they multitasking? You hear the clanking going on. And so whenever I collaborate with someone with video, and if they don't have their camera on, I'm always wondering what's going on. I always ask them. Sometimes they say, I'm having a bad hair day, I'm in my pajamas, and I say, turn it on anyway. I just want to be able to see you and communicate more effectively. But I think video does make a huge difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're using it all the time in a lot of interesting ways. So before we wrap up this segment, I'm just what do you think, as you're sort of looking back at a career, what's the most courageous moment in your career?
When I was at Forrester Research, we're all about the future, digital disruption, and I had this idea to launch a magazine, a paper magazine. I come out of the publishing industry, and what I realized is that we were penetrating like people at the director and management level, but C-suite people were not engaging with Forrester Research. And so we did some consumption analysis about how they consume content, and they weren't going to the Forrester website, they weren't downloading research reports, but they were reading Fortune and Forbes and The Economist, and they were engaging in print magazines. And so contrary to all this direction of moving digitally, we moved physically into a magazine, and we launched a magazine. And in fact, now, in the world of B2B marketing that you know well, no one's picking up the phone, as you prospect. No one's answering, email. And so one of the tools that a lot of marketers are using now is, going old school and sending a direct mail piece. So if you're in the C-suite and you get a direct mail piece, it's almost like this artifact that arrives, and you look at it and you physically open it up, and there's a book there or a bottle of wine or some sort of report, and it gets more attention than any email or any voicemail that no one listens to. So it's kind of interesting how we've sort of gone back to this era of physical versus digital.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to somebody, I think it was at Gartner, and they wanted to know what the top trends were, and we were talking about these trends, and I just write all those trends down and say, okay, let's do the opposite, because it's funny, we got a magazine the other day from Airbnb. It was amazing. It was amazing. It was beautifully done, and I kept it and I read it and I was pouring through it of all the places I wanted to go, and I thought, now this is astonishing. A brand that doesn't really exist on a physical nature at all produces a magazine that creates an experience that reminds you of all the cool experiences that are waiting.
That's an unbelievable example. I just wrote that down, that Airbnb, the most modern of companies, as you say, they have no physical assets. It's basically a website and a bunch of data. They developed a physical magazine that they put in the U.S. mail and send it to people. It's just crazy.
It is.
I love that.
And it was beautifully produced. Well, all these writers that used to write for magazines, they got to do something. So, all right. Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're really going to dive into measurement and metrics, because that's such an important part of everything that we do. It's also an important part of my new book that I'll be talking about over the next 20 episodes. So stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back, and my guest is Brian Cardin, CMO of Fuse. We've been talking a lot about just big strategy thinking and Einstein and amazing writers and so forth, and zigging when everybody else zags. But what's interesting, and what I want to focus the rest of this conversation on, is how do you know your marketing is working? Because and one of the key things that I talk a lot about is you can have a great strategy, you can artfully present it, you can thoughtfully deliver all the great content in the world, but if you don't have the right metrics in place to sort of track and measure and figure out and test these things, you'll ultimately won't be able to be successful. So let's talk about that. First of all, how's that premise work for you? I mean, do you agree that if you don't have the right metrics, your chances are you're not going to be able to keep your job?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
So let's break this down. And first, let's start with the simplest possible metrics that you have in your mind that matter to you, sort of your personal, I know I'm doing a good job when we hit these things.
Well, I like the way you framed it, because they're obviously with all these tools we have now, all these tools have dashboards and they have hundreds of metrics. And so there is this tendency of marketers to just spew out hundreds and hundreds of numbers, and they have no meaning at all. And so getting focus, I think, is a key theme here, because you can't focus on 50 or 100 metrics. It has to be fewer rather than more. And then you also have to share them with sales and your CEO and your board. So the ones that matter to me are, number one, how much of the net new pipeline did marketing source? So I care about pipeline sourced, I care about marketing influenced, and I care about what percentage of the bookings that closed were sourced and influenced by marketing. So I care about pipeline creation, and I care about bookings that closed that were sourced by marketing and influenced by marketing.
Right. And so those are interesting metrics to me. One, because in theory, marketing is the front door that everybody sort of sees the brand through and gets some kind of exposure. So it is, pipeline is a representative of the number of people that you touched divided by the number of people that care, if you will,
right. Yeah.
Or the other way around. And so, but that metric in and of itself would be misleading, because you could get a lot of people in there that didn't really care, but they
right.
just somehow or other, whatever reason you incentivize them. So having another metric like closing, that's interesting, right?
But it also depends how you define pipeline. So ours are VO, or better, visible opportunity. So it has to be validated by a salesperson, and there has to be a dollar figure in your CRM in Salesforce. So it's not like we create stuff and no one validates it. That's why very often marketers like to measure MQLs, marketing qualified leads, because no one has to validate that. Like, you can generate those and you can define them any the hell way you want. But with us, pipeline is defined in a very specific way, and we need a salesperson to validate that, yes, that is a real deal. There's a dollar value. I spoke to this. It's part of pipeline. So that's one area that pipeline is validated. And then you're right. I want to see where's the beef? Did we actually close anything? Did we source something that actually we won?
So, and I want to get into that, but before we do, so we'll call those sales qualified leads. Is a SQL? Yeah. Is that the language that you all would use?
Yeah.
And so, from the numbers that I've heard from various CMOs range from 10% to 70% in terms of the amount of leads that have been qualified through the pipeline. What's a good number in your mind that someone should be aiming for? And again, we're talking enterprise here for you, at least, right? We're talking about big targets and long sales cycle. I mean, I think I heard you say it was over a year. Sometime.
Exactly.
Right.
We have your sales cycle. So as you know, mileage will vary based on deal size, cycle time, and everything. So for us, it's about 20% to 25% of closed deals we want to source. If you're a high velocity with a low selling point, we sell our product for about, the average deal is about $300,000 a year, and it's a 3-year deal. So it's almost $1 million total contract value. Takes a year in cycle. So if we can source 20, 25%, that's awesome for enterprise. One of your previous speakers was Meg Eisenberg at MongoDB. I think she's sort of in the same range. And then you get high velocity where it's it's a $15,000 deal or a $30,000 deal, and you close lots of those, and the cycle time is maybe 60 days, and marketing should source 70 or 80% of those. HubSpot's a good example. HubSpot marketing sources about 80% of all the deals that close, but their average deal size is like $12,000 a year. It's still very small. So
yeah, it's funny. So with Meg, and then there's a couple things I want to come back. I'm so glad you brought that one up because, first of all, they have a free product, right? They have and they get 40,000 downloads of that a day.
It's massive. It's massive.
Yeah.
She has all these tire kickers coming in.
Yeah, if you can't close a few of those, I mean, you gotta, something's wrong with your business model.
But just to be clear, Drew, the real art of that marketing is disqualifying all those 40,000 people a day. There's a lot of junk in there.
Right.
If she passed all that stuff over to sales, the company would be buried. So I think her job is filtering, appending additional data, sorting through the junk from the real leads. And so that's a different marketing challenge. She doesn't have to generate more leads.
Right.
She has to be able to disqualify and qualify what she's got.
Right. And so, that's why she has 28 different marketing technologies in her stack, which is down now from 35, which was a big number to me. But I heard you say that you had 28 marketing technologies as well. What are you using them all for?
It's so funny. Megan is one of my closest friends, and I've known her for years. And she's an early adopter of a lot of technology. She sits on a lot of advisory boards, and she's one of the people that I completely respect. And so she and I talk probably once a month. And I feel like almost a drug dealer with her, like, Meg, what's working, what's not? She'll say, I tried this technology, piece of crap, don't touch it for a year. Or she'll say, well, I just did something new and it is killing it. Do you want to know what it is? It's like, holy crap. Like, so we share, and so as you know, there's 5,000 plus marketing technologies. There's probably another 2,000 sales technologies out there. It's so easy to get buried. And so Megan, as well as other CMOs, are sort of my filters. I belong to this group of CMOs where I live in Boston. About 20 of us get together once a month, and we all talk about what's working, what isn't, to try to filter down the technologies. But I'm like Megan. I used to have more technologies, and my marketing team had bigger eyes than a stomach. They bit off more than they could actually consume. And so there were some technologies that look really great, but our limitation is not our budget. And please don't tell the vendors this, Drew. Right. The limitation is not the budget, it's bandwidth. We don't have enough marketing time to actually fully integrate, configure, inform the sales team. So what I found we were building this extremely sophisticated cockpit for salespeople, for marketing, and it's almost like too many dials and too many buttons. Yeah. We all have these cars. Well, you may not because you live in New York City. Do you have a car?
I do.
Yeah, you do have a car. But I'm sure that it has a lot of things in there that you don't even know about, that you've never tried, voice activation and this and that. So I don't want marketing to be like that. I don't want to have tools we don't use. I'd rather have fewer tools and use them more fully and integrate them and work better with fewer rather than have too many. So Megan and I actually have talked about this, that we bought too many things, they were underutilized, and we had to prune back.
There you go. So lots of things that come to mind there, but let's go back to, so we have net new pipeline as that first measure of marketing is doing its job. Then you sort of marketing influence things you mentioned in the middle, and then close bookings. Well, how that's hard. I mean, it's so long from the sales cycle. How do you make sure that you are learning along the way what matters that got to that close? Because it can't simply be that because spent too much time looking at talking to Brent Adamson at Gartner about this just sort of spaghetti process, 5.4 people on the committee, long buying cycle, all sorts of stops and starts. How do you know in between there what you're doing is sort of influencing and making a difference, other than, it can't be just you got a lead and then sales did their job?
No, we have all these leading indicators for us. So, when I started my marketing career, we used to, do an annual plan. And then maybe 10 years ago, we're doing when I was at Eloqua, we would do a big quarterly refresh of our marketing. We would spend a whole day analyzing what happened in the quarter. And maybe a couple of years ago, we would look at it monthly or weekly. And now it's continuous. And so on the fly, we're making continuous changes. I kind of feel like it's almost like stock trading now. Like you get some indication that futures are up, or the Hang Seng index is down, or orange futures are doing this, and you have to make changes all the time. So we're doing, on our website, for example, we probably have 40 tests going on our website right now, A/B tests using Optimizely. Little things, size of buttons, color of buttons, calls to action, placement on the page. So every time you refresh it, it'll look slightly different, and people will be presented with slightly different pages each time to see what, session length, bounce rate, click-through rate, so a whole bunch of things. And then I'm looking at campaign performance all the time. So while I can't figure out whether a campaign delivered closed business, I can know whether the campaign was successful in delivering a marketing qualified lead and then a sales qualified lead. So I'm looking at early indicators. So in the course of a year, we run a couple of hundred campaigns. a campaign could be an email campaign. It could be a physical event. It could be, any number of things. But we're always looking at measurement of the campaign, and we're looking at the cost for an MQL all the time. So we have a pretty high cost per MQL. It's, I dare say, it's over $300 for a marketing qualified lead. And when I was at Eloqua, it was about $120. So I'm thinking, scratching my head, why? Well, our deal size is so much larger. So exactly. I'm willing to pay more money for a much bigger deal. So we look at all these things. If I was HubSpot and I paid $300 for a lead, I'd kill myself.
Right.
That was crazy because they have low conversion rates and everything. So all these things sort of come together. So I'm always looking at performance of my campaigns, cost per MQL, and conversion rates from inquiry to MQL to what we call a discovery call, which is sort of an SQL or an SQO, to pipeline. It's part of visible opportunities, to closed won. So I'm looking at that all the time. But I think a big part of this is the time period has collapsed dramatically from annual to quarterly, monthly, daily, continuous. And great marketing organizations, I think, are doing this continuously.
Okay. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into this even more. So stay with us. Hey, it's Drew. I wanted to use this break to ask you a single question. Are you a courageous marketer? Do you have the courage to go to your board of directors and say, marketing could drive the growth of this company? We just need 3 times the budget. Do you have the courage to take the big idea that you already have and extend it internally and externally through influencers, through the media, through all of your content? If you're a courageous marketer but aren't sure how to roadmap all of this, I have a big idea for you. It's called Renegade Thinking. It's a program that we've developed and work with exclusively for B2B marketers, generally at large companies. And I want to give you my cell phone, 917-679-8852. Just text Renegade Thinking to 917-679-8852, and we can talk about how you can cut through. Okay, we're back, and my guest is Brian Cardin. We've been talking about this phenomenon of continuous campaign management. You talked a lot about A/B testing, which is certainly obviously important. One of the big questions that I have in all of this is you start to optimize based on this micro measurement. And so you say, all right, we want a little more time on the page, or we want them to have a little bit of higher click-through or a lower bounce rate, or all these sort of what I'll call micro measurements. And here you are dealing with deals that are $1 million or greater over a 3-year period. At some point in time, a CISO comes to the website to look at something. A CFO might need something. Those folks that are on the buying committee there's so few of them, and they're the only ones that matter in this decision on top of the one person that you may have gotten into the pipeline to begin with, right? Nobody can make a decision in business on their own anymore. So how do you make sure that while you're optimizing each of these little things for an MQL or an SQL, you are not, because there could be one piece of content that you have that's only downloaded 10 times, right? But that may be the most important content that you have on your site. So how do you deal with that in the sort of these micro measurements versus the big measurement, which is, hey, we got to close this sale?
So it's extremely difficult for most marketers. I would be disingenuous if I said we've got this one nailed, but we do have campaigns for the whales, for the big ones. So there are, the top 100 accounts that we really care about, and we invite people to things. We'll spend a lot more money for meeting with them than much smaller companies. But you're right, an MQL could end up in a $10 million deal or a $50,000 deal, but we treat MQLs the same. Would I be willing to pay more for an MQL if it delivered a larger deal? But it's very difficult to do that. So what we do is we do segment by size of account and TAM, total available market. How big are these companies and how much money? So it's much more bespoke what we do for the top 100 accounts in the world that we really care about. So we're nurturing them. And to your point, no salesperson is going to be able to maintain relationships with more than 2 or 3 contacts at that account. So what marketing can do is broaden out the relationships. So they're working with 2 or 3 contacts at, some big account, let's say Accenture, we would then add maybe 50 or 100 different contacts at different levels. And we would do nurture campaigns to all those different titles. Because as you said, very few people are buying by themselves. It's all committee buying by teams are buying things. There's a lot more collaboration in these decisions, particularly for wall-to-wall communications, our category. There's certain categories
Sure.
where 2 or 3 people can make a decision. But in the case of wall-to-wall communications, it's the CFO, even head of HR, business unit heads, the CEO themselves. It's their phones, and they're going to have their board meeting with an audio bridge using Fuse. And the CIO will get fired if that call doesn't work. If there's not high call quality, if the call is dropped, the CIO is out of a job. So that's sort of how we look at it, sort of segmenting things in different ways.
Right. Okay. Where are you in terms of sort of attribution modeling? I mean, do you have a sense of whether it's the content or the type of programs where you can say, yeah, this type of thing is worth spending more on because it is, sort of late stage stuff. So therefore we can, where are you with that, with attribution?
Yeah, we think we're doing a pretty good job. So we have Serious Decisions consulting with us. We think we sort of have world-class attribution, as good as it gets. It's not perfect. And so we're looking at, all the deals and what content they touch at what stages. So we tag all of our content, whether it's early stage, tofu, mofu, bofu, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And so we're looking at that. But we also have some very interesting things on our website now that if a prospect, so if it's an unknown prospect, obviously we use reverse IP lookup, so we'll know what company they're from, assuming they're not calling in or using Comcast or Verizon from their home, but they're at their company. So we know what company's there. And for example, if they're looking at our pricing page or our product page, it would imply they're further down the funnel. If they're downloading content about the future of work or something very high level, they're not as interested. And so we try to follow up with content based on what stage they are, because we tag different pages on our website and different content on our website for what stage in the buying process they are, which is something I think a lot of companies don't do, but is very valuable for us.
And so if I'm looking at your pricing page, is it likely that I'll get a call from a salesperson? Because I remember that's happened to me in other cases.
So that's a very interesting question. We debate the creepiness all the time.
It is
kind of creepy.
Exactly. By the way, Forrester did that to me.
So I was at Forrester, and we put in all the technology that knew when people come to the website, and we set up alerts to the salespeople. So, if Renegade is coming to the website, we would route that immediately through Salesforce to the rep, and the rep on Renegade would know that and was told to immediately call you, because all of the data suggests that if you get them within 1 minute, you have much higher conversion rate than if you wait 2 hours. So the SLA information is very, very interesting, because obviously if you're on the Forrester website, you're thinking about it, your mindset's there, and in 10 minutes, you're on a new topic, you're doing something different. So getting people when they're in that thought process. And so our conclusion, and please challenge me, I know you will, is that people are over the creepiness. Like, people understand that when you go to a website, there are marketers, seeing what you're doing, they're putting cookies on you. This is just part of the new world, that we're not shocked that if you're interested in Caribbean vacation, you suddenly see ads for Caribbean vacations, or after you go to the Fuse website, you're going to see our ads for the next week or so. That's just part of the new world. So,
yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a fine line here. One of the premises that, I think that if you are always doing things that are making it easier for the buyer to buy, as opposed to trying to sell, then I think you're on really good territory. So if the call came in and said, hey, we noticed you were on our website. By the way, we just did a study that's relevant to this. Would you like a copy of it? That's not creepy at that point. What's creepy is or annoying is when that call comes in and it's, hey, we noticed you're on this website, so you want to buy? It's like used cars, right? And that's the sort of the difference here is, in my mind at least, is that as long as you're progressing and continuing to be thoughtful and helpful, you're in good place, because that's what this person is on a journey, and they're not going to be able to make the decision alone anyway.
So the nuance that we put in here is, I think a person coming to a website doesn't want a call from a human being, but we have a bot now. We call her Natalie, and we send an email out that says, "Hey, Drew, we saw you on our website looking at this. Here's a content in the video that you might find helpful." So they don't have this, "Oh my God, a person has just called me," creepiness,
Right.
But it's a bot, and we identify Natalie as a bot and just say, "We saw you on the website. We know who you are. And based on where you are, here's some things that could be helpful. Let us know." And so Natalie's able to deal with lots of people. She scales really well. She responds immediately. So if you're on our website at 3 a.m, Natalie emails you right away. And so we're experimenting with these kinds of things. We see bots and live chat in so many different categories now that we think this could help, that a person is not ready yet to talk to a human being. They just don't want that experience yet. But they will interact with a bot.
I can't wait to see how that works out. I still think this is me, old school. There are times when bots are really great because they're efficient and so forth. Look, I don't want to talk to someone at Google. I just want to Google and get that information. I'm used to that. But there are other times where I just want to hit that 0 button and talk to a damn human being, right? Obviously, in a customer service context, that really matters. But anyway, it'd be interesting to see how that works. It's certainly efficient, and in theory, you can apply artificial intelligence so you can really actually start to anticipate what this person might need. I want to circle back for a second. One question is, do you have a brand health tracking in place?
So okay. I wish we did, and we had outlined it and gotten proposals for it. We do not have it.
And so how do you know, without that, how do you know how customers perceive the brand, how prospects perceive the brand, and if there are any sort of issues related to the brand that are beyond what sort of marketing can control?
The two ways I do it. One is we have Net Promoter Score for our product amongst customers. That's one area. So we have Net Promoter Score. Do you like our product? Do you like our service? So after someone calls us for a support call, or we rate all those things. So we do have Net Promoter Score. The other thing I do is I want to measure prospect satisfaction with the sales and marketing process. So we do win-loss reporting. So every quarter we have a third party do interviews with 20 deals that we've either won or lost. It's usually about 15 that we've won, 5 that we lost. Needless to say, lost deals are less likely to talk to us, but won deals will. Right. We ask them questions like, how did you find out about us? Were you aware of our brand before? What were your perceptions? Right. But it's not quantitative. It's only 20 in-depth interviews. But we learn fascinating things like the first salesperson was not helpful. They offended us. The first meeting was really good. You trashed your competition, which we didn't think that was a good thing. Your pricing was too high in the beginning. We learn all these things. And I would encourage marketers to use a third party and not to do it themselves. We also did something interesting. In Salesforce, there's a field called, after a deal is closed, either won or lost, if it's lost, there's a field that says, why did you lose the deal? And, salespeople would always put in, pricing or product didn't do it. And if they won a deal, it's because they had a great relationship. So what we put into Salesforce now, the default of when you lose a deal is outsold by competitors.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So it requires salespeople to be a little more thoughtful about why they lost the deal. But we found that prospects don't always confide in the salesperson about why they lost the deal. It's very hard for people to say, listen, you weren't a good salesperson, or you didn't really find my sweet spot here, or so we use a third party to do that. But salespeople, when they lose a deal, they think they know why, but our research suggests they don't really understand why. You need somebody else to dig that information out.
Well, it's also so complicated, as you said, because a salesperson may only be with 2 of the 5 people on the committee. And so they're not going to get to, say, the chief security officer who's behind the scenes and so forth. So that's interesting. All right. So no brand health, wish you had it. And because to me, that's a really important part of this. Now, we talked about the measurements that matter to you as the CMO to sort of understand what you're doing and how you're constantly getting these real-time things. Are there different metrics that matter when you're presenting to, say, the CEO and the board of directors?
There are different ones. So just a few things that I think about is they care a lot about the CAC ratio, cost of acquiring customer over lifetime value. They also care about sales and marketing as a percent of revenue, that it's declining. So they want to see the productivity of sales and marketing, that every nth dollar is driving incremental bookings or incremental sales. So we want to try to show the productivity. A big part of a growing company is scaling. So they want to see that your product is scaling, engineering is scaling, that your finance department is scaling. As you grow, you spend a lower percentage on that department. So we want to see sales and marketing expense as a percentage of revenue or bookings going down. So we do the CAC ratio, what it costs to acquire a customer over lifetime value. I do conversion rates as well. So a lot of things I talked about before, the pipeline sourcing and influence, the closed deals, but I also do conversion metrics from different stages that I share. I find generally, though, that boards of directors, most boards that I presented to, do not have anyone in that room who has a marketing background. They'll have a finance background, there'll be investment bankers, VC background, they're sort of spreadsheet people. There might be a salesperson, which is always helpful, but there won't be someone with that real in-depth knowledge of a marketer's world. And I see their eyes glaze over very often when you start talking about a lot of the marketing metrics. So marketing usually just has a few slides in most board decks. The key thing, I think, is to show good alignment with sales. Very often they'll ask me a question, or they'll ask the salesperson a question, sales leader a question. They want to make sure we're talking the same way, we respect each other. Sales and marketing should definitely both be in the same room when they're talking about sales and or marketing. I've seen sometimes a salesperson presents sales, leaves the room, then the marketing person goes up there. That's a really bad dynamic. And when the salesperson is presenting, very often I'll give some color commentary. And then when I'm presenting, our sales leader will give some color commentary on marketing. So talk the same language, show that you like each other and respect each other, because it's extremely common to have sales and marketing killing each other and demeaning and finger pointing.
And I think that's such an important point, and I want to just emphasize that for a second. And this is a theme that we're hearing more and more with the folks that we talk to, which is the division between sales and marketing is completely artificial. That where marketing ends and sales begins and sales ends and marketing begins, they are so close, and they're getting closer every second, right? Because you're constantly creating tools that salespeople can use. Salespeople are constantly getting needs that you need to fulfill. So the notion that you two could present separately is absurd, but it's interesting that still happens. Yes. And just so having common language is interesting and important. So that all makes sense. One question that I have is with this sort of CAC, customer lifetime value, acquisition cost versus lifetime value. Lifetime value is always projected, right? Because we do it based on a 3-year or whatever. We're going to have them for that long. Cost per acquisition is sort of all in, right? How do we actually calculate cost per acquisition?
Yeah, so there are different ways to do it. Bessemer Ventures has a good guidebook. There's a guy named Byron Dieter at Bessemer that has sort of best in class for software as a service SaaS companies, how you do it. Mm-hmm. The cost of acquiring a company is all the costs associated with getting new logos. So very often it's all of sales costs and all of marketing costs, including headcount, not just programs. And then lifetime value is not necessarily just the term of the contract. Mm-hmm. We know that our average customer renews and they have a life of 7 years. So that's our calculation on lifetime value. So you do a sort of discounted cash flow over 7 years, and then it terminates. You assume that they leave after there. So even though we signed a 3-year deal, we calculate lifetime value as 7 years based on our history and our renewal rate.
One of the things that I always wanted to sort of add to that formula is sort of cost of acquiring a happy customer. And in other words, because ultimately, you live and die by your case histories and your happy customers and the testimonials that you get. What does it cost? And so I'm just wondering if there's ever a way to sort of bring in and say, all right, these were really good customers. They are very happy with the brand. They are advocates for us. They're using it in the fullest possible way. What did it cost us to acquire them? What is that lifetime value and the ripple effect of having a satisfied customer, because that lowers your customer acquisition cost down the road? Is that me having a pipe dream?
No, it's fascinating you say that. The guy who created this Net Promoter Score is a guy named Fred Reichheld from Bain. sure you know
Sure.
Fred or you've seen him talk.
Yeah.
And he has a very interesting chart about the value of a happy customer. It's not, people always assume, oh, it's the value of the contract. No, no, no. You also can upsell and cross-sell them. There's also the value of references, the halo effect. They've told 4 other people what a great experience is. It's like a great restaurant. You tell people, a crappy restaurant, people tell people as well. So the value of a happy customer is much greater than the bookings that you took, the contract size. It's about the ability to upsell and cross-sell over time, to sell them more, and it's the ability to use them as a reference. He's got 4 or 5 other things that add to the value. So the value of a customer is so much greater. He's also looked at what you just said, is what's the value of an unhappy customer? So it costs money in support. They do a lot of calls. They complain about what's going on. They threaten to terminate, to churn. So the salesperson gets involved. All the hundreds of hours that you have to try to save that deal, or they want a credit, or they want to renegotiate. It's all these things. So it works the other way too. I remember when I was at Forrester, we did a profitability analysis of all of our customers, and we realized that some of our smallest customers were the whiniest.
Right.
That per dollar of revenue for them, they made more calls, they complained more, they called support, they sucked up all of the time with the analysts. And so our CEO, George, he said, let's just fire those guys. Like, they're hurting us. They're just a downer. We love customers that are positive, they're not whiny, they're not overcalling. And so I think there's a lot of rationale. Looking at your long tail of customers, people assume, oh, they're low maintenance, let's keep that long tail. But if you're a service organization, or they're calling support desk, or they're calling salespeople, they can be really a burden on the organization.
Not to mention the cost that it has on an employee, how they feel about the company and having it. But so wrapping this up, we started this conversation by talking about marketing qualified lead and sales qualified lead, but nowhere in there was it marketing qualified lead for a company that potentially is going to be more satisfied than another one. And so in other words, if you could go back to all your customers and say, this 10% is happier than the other 90%, and then we acquired them this way through this process, then you would sort of say, okay, or at least we could say this profile is a profile that we do really well with.
Drew. So we have proxies for satisfaction, and it's by industries. So we know that we have a really good use case for these 5 industries, and so we prioritize those industries. We know that education and government, we've had customers, they're not that happy for a variety of reasons I can't go into, but they churn out faster than other industries. So we've done the analysis of several years of history about who churns, who upsells, who renews, and we've developed through Predictive Analytics a series of conclusions of where we should try to sell into, where people are most happy, they renew at higher rates, they buy more from us over time, they become references, and so we double down on those industries. It's just a proxy. It's not quite as precise as you're implying, but we do have proxies for who we should target. These are the best, these are the best fish to catch because they taste great.
Yeah. And that's really, okay. So that answers, and using predictive and so forth. Okay. So as we wrap this thing up, because this has been an amazing conversation, as you start to look ahead at some of the things that you're doing, how much will you be using AI and predictive analytics as a means of, say, throwing up, pushing out content, changing the way, the content is shared when someone comes into your website, that kind of thing?
I kind of view it as like marketing is sort of B2B in stages. There was sort of this first stage, of traditional B2B marketing, a lot of direct mail. We're sort of the arts and crafts department. And then, about 15 years ago, we became modern marketers with Eloqua, Marketo, HubSpot, web tracking. Like, we had a marketing stack. We never had that in the 1950s or 60s or 70s or 80s even. And so I'm asking the question, what's after you have lead scoring and you have email campaigns and you have webinars, And so I'm seeing artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, like figuring out which customers you should go after, using bots, as we said. I'm doing analytics on who's at risk of churning. So I have the at-risk list using past history to predict, are there a set of attributes where we can get a leading indicator that Drew is not happy, like he hasn't been to the website in 30 days, or he just put a support ticket in, Are there a set of attributes that could predict he's going to churn, and we can, ameliorate that situation? So a lot of predictive analytics, bots, artificial intelligence. The analogy, I think, is really Wall Street. 20 years ago, there were a lot of like bond traders, like trading bonds and screaming on the floor. And now it's a very quiet floor because the algorithms are doing all the trading. Like, they know. I'm just wondering if marketing can get to that point where, rather than a bunch of marketers sitting in a room looking at data, whether we can write algorithms where it can automate it. If this, then this. If a person consumes this content, we know historically that people with that profile tend to like this piece of content next, or send them here, or route this over here. So I think we're starting to see more of that happen, more automation and more artificial intelligence through data mining, just like bond traders. Human beings can't, bond traders, you can't absorb all the data that's happening in the world, and just like that is true of marketing. Like, if we have a big prospect, they came to the website, but they're on other websites, they Googled this, they downloaded the Gartner Magic Quadrant, they watched the video. Like, in real time, can a human being really do that at scale? You can't. There's too much happening. And so we're finding that you can write algorithms that create business rules that consume this data and then can tell marketing to take this next best action, all automated.
And so then what's the role of the CMO at that point?
I think it's really writing the algorithms. It's like, investment banks, have to use a lot of experience and judgment, and they write all these algorithms for when to trade a bond, or when to, put a call in, or when to do a bull spread, and so it's becoming just more automated. There's a big role for marketing. It's just becoming much more data mining, much more artificial intelligence. There are people in marketing at Netflix, but they have recommendation engines that say, oh, Drew watched these movies before. I know where he lives. People in his socioeconomic cohort like these movies too, therefore recommend these. So you don't need, a human being to look at Drew's behavior to recommend what movies. It's faster and more efficient with a bot to crawl through all those data. The recommendation engine on Amazon is amazing. I don't need a human being to look at my past purchase history to tell me that I need to buy detergent this week. Like, a bot is much better at doing that. So I think this is sort of where marketing is going, much more data mining, real-time intelligence, and not just telling marketers what to do next, but actually doing it, actually executing the campaign automatically based on what they've learned.
And then we'll all be sitting in the Bahamas watching the bots do their thing. So two things. One, Netflix, I do not want to watch any more English mysteries. So stop putting them in front of me. That's my wife's preference, and it's driving me crazy.
That's a problem, of course. The old Barbie syndrome. You buy a Barbie for your kids and they keep marketing Barbies.
Yeah, stop. I don't want another English mystery. So that's number one. And number two, I still believe that ideas and storytelling and artfulness are going to really matter more. And then I think that the brands that know how to use this technology have only part of the game covered. And there's still going to be a major human factor in marketing that's going to want to attract people into the industry. But that could just be me being a dinosaur. We'll see. So, Brian, thank you so much for being on the show. It's an amazing conversation.
It's a great conversation. Also, you're in a different level from most people that interview me. Like, I think your breadth of knowledge of this, of the categories, your intellectual curiosity about things. You've obviously interviewed a lot of marketers. So it's really a pleasure to talk to you, because I can't think of any marketing topic that you don't really have good knowledge about. It's really a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, that's great. Well, I look forward to doing it again, because we just covered like 1/4 of what I wanted to ask you. So, Brian, best of luck to you, and we'll keep you posted when the show comes out. And to all the listeners, thank you for hanging in with us here today. I know it was a longer episode than normal, but if you enjoyed it, if you found some metrics that matter for you, please feel free to share and, of course, subscribe. We always appreciate that. So until next week, keep those Renegade Thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.